Hello, everyone. I'm Brainerd Carey, and today I'm talking about self-help for artists. And what does that mean? What would that mean? So, to begin with, I'm Brainerd Carey. I direct Praxis Center for Aesthetic Studies. I've written 6 books for artists to develop their careers. One of them is The Art World Demystified, Making It in the Art World, New Markets for Artists. And then there's recent ones about selling art online, social media, and fundraising for artists. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about self-help and what that means. So for me, I read a lot of different books on ways of achieving more, doing more in our lives. A lot of those recently have been manuals in Stoic philosophy. Stoic philosophies are drawn largely from specific writers like Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor, and several others who talk about things like the obstacle is the way, how to use what seem like impediments in your life to move through them. And these things are interesting, right? And so are a number of other ideas that people continue to have and put forth in terms of how to have a more fulfilling life. However, as I read all of these, and many of which are inspiring and interesting and stimulate more thinking for me, I realize that when you get advice from a lot of these books that are geared towards the general public, however you want to see it, but they're geared towards men and women all over the world who presumably could all use this advice. Some of the advice they're giving is to find something you're passionate about and pursue that, outside of your job. Some of the advice is to also do something that makes you more in the moment, so you can enjoy life more. So when I look at those things, I think artists are already beyond that, right? Artists are already doing something that is keeping them in the moment, which is painting, drawing, sculpting, dreaming up new ideas. That is being in the moment. And the idea of finding something you are passionate about and pursuing it and sharing it is also something artists already do, right? So in a way, all of these books aren't written for artists. They're almost written for everybody but artists. So I want to offer more things here, that it's not as though artists are so self-assured and everything is running so great that they don't need any support with self-help. But I want to make the distinction that I feel like I've come to lately, that typical self-help books, even written by wonderful people like Ryan Holiday, who I'm a big fan of, all of these books apply to people who are working a daily grind and finding that there's something about their lives that's missing, right? Some kind of a passion, as well as living in the moment and enjoying family and friends more. And the more I read about that, the more I realize artists are an exception here. Artists don't need that kind of self-help. We already have something we're passionate about. We already know in many ways how to enjoy life, which is to make art and to share it, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. So pushing all that literature aside, not that I'm not still reading it, I'm still interested in those philosophers. Marcus Aurelius is a fascinating guy, but he's also doing something that's quite different. He's managing several wars and senators that are, all backbiting and all kinds of things. This is what he's managing, and that's compared to the life that most of us are managing. So again, to step back, artists are also, of course, faced with numerous challenges daily. Income is one of them, relationships, these are things that we're all dealing with, as well as peace of mind. I'm not saying that we don't have lots of room to improve, but just to separate it for a minute, I think that artists are in a different category. So the category we're in is one of message givers. It's one that I've compared to before as something like shamans. And it doesn't have to be that particular word, shaman, because, that's specific to a culture. But what I mean by that is that artists have a message to offer, right? Whether you're painting flowers or political events or sculpting or photographing or doing anything, there is a message that you have as an artist, and you're trying to get it out into the world. So that's why exhibiting, of course, is important. But we already have this very mysterious and very kind of amazing energy that, as I'm sure you know, most people don't even understand where it would come from. If you're not an artist and you look at what artists are doing, it's baffling, really. Where do artists get the motivation to do what they do? Where do they get the motivation to find what they're, making art about? If you're not an artist, that seems completely mystifying and hard to understand, especially since artists don't seem to be primarily concerned with the market, right? Early on in my career, I remember talking to my cousin about the art that I was doing and being in a biennial, and he didn't understand it at all. He said, "Oh, so this is kind of like a commercial for what you're selling?" And he just didn't understand that there was a reason to make art, to put a message out into the world that, has something to do with more than money, because that's how most everyone else is operating. What job are you going to do? What are you going to do to make more money? So again, I'm talking here about self-help for artists, and really how artists don't need typical self-help. However, that does not mean that artists can't be insecure. That doesn't mean we can't be taken down by a subtle humiliation, by a gallery that doesn't respond. That doesn't mean that we can't get nervous before an exhibit, or if we're getting a grant or a donation, have a sense of panic and a sense of worthiness, right? These are all issues that many of you, of course, are familiar with, right? That there is a struggles particular to artists that are that need improving, of course, that we could all need help with. So again, in this talk, I'm separating the idea of how typical books on philosophy and other self-help methods, which I read all the time, often don't apply directly to artists because they're about finding a passion, finding what you love. And artists have already found that. And by and large, artists already have a healthy ego that makes them feel good about what they're doing, right? You know this already. However, there are places we could all improve in our lives. And as artists, in terms of having a career, that's often how do we get that work out into the world? There's the nuts and bolts of doing that, which of course I write books about, I teach classes in, there's support groups in that. But then there's also besides the nuts and bolts of how to reach galleries, how to follow up, how to get grants, how to get residencies, how to get on the international stage, or how to sell art online. All of those things are step-by-step processes that you can do. The missing element for many artists that we could all still use help on is how do we get the energy to do that? How do we not feel that we have somehow not made it from the get-go? How do we not feel that we are not worthy of sales, of greater prices for our art, right? How does that happen? So I have two answers to that. One of them is a support group, right? And that means friends that are around you. Anybody can put together a support group. You could call it a crit, in Long Island City and Queens and different places all around New York, as well as outside of New York. I'm between New Haven and New York, so I have communities in both areas. It's common for someone to open their studio, even if it's small, invite 4 or 5 artists that you know of, and if you don't know of them, look around, go to open studios and invite people, and have a monthly meeting where for an hour or two, you guys talk about art and what you're doing. That's support, right? That's powerful. Community is enormously important to artists because the community of artists, of course, is beyond, as I was saying earlier in this video, the typical self-help issues. And you can all give each other support for what you're doing next. If someone's trying to get into a gallery or trying to get a grant or a residency or a patron or funding, whatever it is. The other method is what I do online. You could read my books if you want. You could read other people's books. A number of people have written books on professional development. And also what I do is I create an online system for learning, which includes a support group on a private Facebook page. So in that group, you not only see people struggling and asking questions, you see people succeeding at what they are doing, getting grants, getting international recognition. And in that group, which perhaps some of you listening are already a member of, there's an awful lot of love and support from other people. And for artists, I think that's what's needed, right? We already know what we're passionate about. It's more support to continue that path, and it's the nuts and bolts and specific steps to get into biennials, major shows, local shows, residencies, nonprofit shows, alternative spaces. That's what's needed in an artist's life. So I'm suggesting in this video about self-help, either start a kind of a crit group in your own studio, or in a friend's studio, or even in a cafe where you can come in and meet 4 or 5 artists a week. You know, organize it yourself. Pick 2 or 3 friends at first, and if you don't have artist friends, go to some open studios or some shows and ask people if they want to be part of a group. A small one, you know, start it with 3 or 4 people. They'll all have friends too. And that's a powerful form. And the other form, of course, is what I do, which I'll put a link to here, but there's a group that you pay for, and there's teachers in there. I'm one of them. I review websites, I talk about your work, what's going on, and I give live talks like this in the group that are about specifics for artists' careers, like how to meet collectors and, you know, how to network and how to respond to galleries, and a whole variety of things that people ask questions about. In fact, people often suggest topics, and then I do live talks on those topics, and they're interactive. So I want to thank you for listening today. Again, this talk, in summary, was about self-help for artists, and how, in one sense, artists don't need the typical self-help. I read a lot of different books on philosophy and biographies, and especially the Stoics. And the Stoics, while they're really interesting and I find them inspiring, the readership that these groups are being pitched to are people who are feeling like they don't have a passion in their life. Should they start a hobby? They're not enjoying the moment enough. You know, this is something artists are already beyond, right? We have that self-help. What's missing in some artists' lives is feedback on their work, as well as nuts and bolts directions of how to get into galleries, how to get into residencies, and how to advance their careers. So, so the 2 solutions for that I'm proposing in this video is you either start your own support group in your studio or a cafe locally, invite 2 or 3 artists and meet once a month. The other method is you can subscribe as a member to my support group and series of classes, which will give you a whole suite of classes, tons of nuts and bolts information, as well as a lot of artists who are creating a kind of warm, supportive atmosphere, you know, and that's what continues there. So I want to wish you well with what you're doing. If you have questions, of course, you can ask in the thread underneath this video. Otherwise, I just want to thank you for being an artist, because I think as an artist, as someone who has a message for the world, a gift for the world, you're a very special person. I mean, special may be too minor a word. You're someone who can help the world be a better place. And we need that more than ever. You know, the whole world is moving to the right. You know, artists are here to make this a better place. So I want to thank you for the work you're doing, because that's why I love doing what I'm doing, which is not just making art, but writing books and supporting artists, because I feel this is a way to change the world. Artists really do change the world, you know, one beautiful moment at a time. And so I want to thank you for doing that. If you're an artist, you're already doing that. So thank you. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask in this thread. Thank you again.